Hi everyone, so this is a different video than what I usually do. I usually do interviews with different organizations, usually centered around the topic of sex trafficking. But recently I've been starting to like branch out from just sex trafficking and kind of doing a lot more uh, interviews about topics that are like or more social issue topics. One of the most recent interviews I did was actually with an organization called the Call to Men, and a Call to Men is like it says, a call to men. It's an organization that helps educate men about domestic violence and how to be a better man and how to be a healthy man, rather than following the toxic masculine stereotypes that our society puts on us. And so I did that interview a few months ago, and I love the interview. I interviewed one of the youth leaders from the organization. It was an amazing interview, and I recommend if you want to know more about toxic masculinity or Call to Men, then you go watch it because it's a great interview. The person that I did it with, he was great. But yeah, so I started to branch out, and then there's this book by Justin Baldoni. He's a famous actor. He was in a Jane the Virgin, and so he's a very famous actor. But he did a TED talk a few years ago, and it was all about toxic masculinity. I'll get to that in a second, but it was all about toxic masculinity and like his life and like how masculinity or toxic masculinity affected him in his life. And so he did that TED talk a few years ago, and then ever since then he went on a different branch in his career. So he was an actor, but he kind of branched out, and he wrote this book, and he has a podcast called Man Enough, and he has a book called Man Enough: Defining Masculinity. And it's a great book. I got it around 9 months ago, and it took me a while to get through, but that doesn't say anything about the book. It's an amazing book. It's honestly one of my favorite books I've read in the past 4 or 5 years. Like it's an amazing book. There's so much information in it, and it's so well written, and the way Justin Baldoni is able to be so vulnerable in this book is really powerful, and it really empowered me to really look at myself and look at how masculinity or toxic masculinity has affected me. But for those of you who don't know, toxic masculinity is it's hard to describe, but for word definition, toxic masculinity involves the cultural pressures for men to behave in a certain way, and it's likely this affects all boys and men in some fashion. Toxic masculinity refers to the notion that some people's ideas of manliness perpetuates domination, homophobia, and aggression. This idea that men need to act tough and avoid showing all emotions can be harmful to their mental health and can have serious consequences for society, which is how it became known as toxic masculinity. So that is just a definition I pulled off a website, and that's the clearest definition I found but it's a lot broader than that. For me, toxic masculinity is the cultural messages that us men or us boys have been taught since we were such a young age. Act tough. If you want to show an emotion, act angry and be rough and be like this manly man, this jock football player. Like that's like the messaging that we kind of feed young boys, and it's I would say the worst part about it is the messaging to not show emotion, and so for me that's the biggest part for me. It's when you tell boys, or society tells boys at least, not to show emotion, to shove their emotions down and just act like you're okay on top. And really, like this definition said, it does really have harmful effects for the boy especially, but also for society, because it just perpetuates violence and anger, and it's a whole cycle, and it gets taught generation after generation. And so I think so. That's the definition of it, and that's what Justin Baldoni really centers around in this book. And so, but it's an amazing book. It's 12. I'm pretty sure it's 12 chapters of just different topics, but all centering around masculinity and his journey through life and how masculinity has really um, impacted him, and his journey from believing this toxic masculine idea that we have been fed since we were kids into becoming his own man and becoming a true man to himself. I believe that masculinity is is different for everyone, and everyone has their own definition of masculinity. Like to me, my definition of masculinity is completely different than the next person's definition of masculinity. And so, I really appreciate Justin Baldoni and how vulnerable he was in this book, and how he was able to take um, such these moments in his life, and he was able to write them out and be vulnerable and just let it out into the world, and then without fear of judgment, because that is what he believes his mission is. His mission, at least from what I know, is to educate boys and to create a better society for boys and for women too, because toxic masculinity also affects women. It affects everyone. And so overall, Justin Baldoni's book is amazing. I'll get further in depth about some of the things I like about his book. But just overall, I think Justin Baldoni did an amazing job with this book, and I highly recommend, even if you're slightly curious about this book or about toxic masculinity or Justin Baldoni in his life, then I really suggest that you pick it up. It's like an autobiography of sorts, so it's really fascinating, and he's an amazing writer, and I highly recommend this book. I can't stress that enough. It's an amazing book. But I will get into some of the things I like about this book in a second. Okay, so one of the first things I really loved about this book is in a later chapter it's all about male insecurity and male sexuality and everything like that. And so at one part of the book, Justin Baldoni talks about his sexual experiences as a kid and growing up and how sex was really pushed on him as he was a kid. It talks a lot about how he was never really that like girly. I mean, it's ironic because it's Justin Baldoni, but he was never that like chick magnet, I guess. But all of his friends, all of his peers would be like blah 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 about girls, and they would just like pretty much locker talk, and so it really impacted Justin Baldoni, and it brought on a lot of insecurities of his, and so, like growing up, and I can honestly relate to this, and that's why I love how vulnerable he is because he really goes in depth about like his first sexual experiences and how he was nervous, but he had to put on this persona like he was really experienced because that's what he thought girls wanted. That's what I guess he really goes into in the book. I guess that's what he thought he was supposed to be. He thought he was supposed to be experienced when in reality whenever someone first has their sexual experience, they're not experienced at all. They have no idea what they're doing. But it's almost like taught that you have to be experienced and you have to know exactly what you're doing, or else you're gonna get made fun of by the girl or by everyone else. And so I really love, especially in this part. It's in a very later chapter near the end of the book, but you, I think it's a really amazing chapter, and I think we can all learn something from it. And me especially, like I've dealt with my own insecurities and I've dealt with my own things I had to work on. And I think the way he goes about it and the way he's like, it's okay. It's okay to take things at your own pace. You don't have to follow what everyone else is saying or saying what they've done, even though, come on. But I don't know. I really like this one chapter because he's so vulnerable, and he just lets everything out, and I think it's really powerful for me because I relate to a lot of the things. And so I don't know. I think it's a great chapter, and I think literally everyone can learn something from that. But with toxic masculinity, it with toxic masculinity, how it's tied into that, it's really like how boys are taught that they have to be this sexual being, and they have to they always have to be wanting to have sex, and if they don't, then they're weird or they're outcasted. And so I just think it's really unique how Justin Baldoni ties in like sexuality and yeah, sexuality with toxic masculinity, and how it's okay to be who you are, and it's okay to take things at your own pace. And if you're uncomfortable with something, then don't do it. And if you're comfortable with something, then do it. It's all up to the person. And toxic masculinity should not um, push that on you. It should be you as a person. I think the worst part about this is that toxic masculinity really does kind of push boys, especially, to do things they're uncomfortable with. And so I think it's really powerful for Justin Baldoni, this like really attractive, famous guy, to be like, no, it's okay to be who you are, and it's okay to take things at your own pace, and don't listen to what everyone else is saying because everyone else is not you. And so I really think this chapter in particular is really powerful. Another one of the chapters I really want to touch on really quickly is this chapter about leadership. He really talks about how to be a man. It's not really about being the strongest or the toughest or the most outspoken. It's really about following your heart and following what's true to you. And I think that's really powerful because not everyone is this tough manly man. Like me myself, like I wouldn't consider myself this strong brooding man that can like fight anyone. Like I'm not like that, but I would still consider myself a man. I have my strengths in other areas, like, and I'm true to myself. I'm true to the values that I share. So I would consider myself a man. And like I said earlier, masculinity is different for everyone. But I really like how Justin Baldoni says that like follow who you are. Like if you follow your beliefs and you're strong and independent, strong in your morals and your beliefs, then you are a man. You don't have to be this strong, tough guy. And then also the biggest part, toxic masculinity. One of the biggest things I mentioned is that toxic masculinity really preaches the idea that you can't show emotions at all. And I think more than anything, the most powerful part is how Justin Baldoni is like, I cry, I'm scared, like I feel these emotions, and I want them to be out there because that's what's healthy. Because it's not healthy to keep all these emotions bottled inside. Because at the end of the day, all those emotions just add up and they just become anger. You're just angry that you can't let these emotions out. You're angry at the world, and so I think it's really powerful how Justin Baldoni is like, emotions are for everyone. Emotions aren't just a girl thing. They're a people thing. Like it's a human thing. Humans have emotions, and so let those emotions out. It's okay if you cry. It's okay if you're scared. It's okay if you don't know what you're doing. Like just be yourself and let it all out because it's better out than in. Like I think that's really powerful, especially for Justin Baldoni to say because like I said, he's like this bigger than life, bigger than the average person. But he's still a person. He still feels emotions, and he's still real. And I think it's really powerful. Justin Baldoni's like, don't listen to the shove and bottle your emotions down, but let them out, and be proud of them because everyone is human and everyone has emotions. And so those are like the three things that I really loved about the book. And there's so much more. There's 12 chapters. Like I said, each chapter delves into something completely different and unique, all centering around his life and his experiences as well as toxic masculinity and what he wished he knew. Um, but I think it's amazing. And he also has a podcast called Man Enough. And I really recommend checking that out because that's an amazing podcast as well. But yeah, overall, I just want to finish by saying Justin Baldoni, it's a Man Enough, Defining Masculinity. It's an amazing book. I really recommend checking it out. Um, yeah, it's one of the best books I've ever written or ever read. It's one of the best books I ever will read, and it's done so much for me. It's helped me learn so much and expand who I am so much. And I'm not even exaggerating that. Like it's helped me grow as a person. And so, if you're curious and if if you want to know more, then please check it out. I'll link it below on Amazon. And yeah, I really recommend checking out Justin Baldoni himself, the book, the podcast, his TED Talk. They're all amazing. His website, it's all amazing. So thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed. I know it's my first time doing this, so it's like kind of jumbled, but thank you for watching. And yeah.